So after some years they'll become allies. The daughter of the king of the south will go to the king of the north to make an alliance, but she won't retain her power, and he and his power will not last. In those days she'll be handed over together with her royal escort and her father and the one who supported her. What on earth does history make of this? Well, the king of the south will become strong. Now, the king of the south who became strong was the first Ptolemy, Ptolemy I, Soter. He was given authority over Egypt in 323 BC. That was very early in the piece. That was on the death, immediately upon the death of Alexander. Ptolemy is told, you look after that part of the empire. He probably decides to do it himself. The general's in conference. He was proclaimed king of Egypt some 19 years later in 304 BC. Well, that's it. I've been ruler here long enough. Time to make myself a king. That's what you do. And so that was the king of the south. He became strong. But one of the commanders will become stronger, and that other one was Seleucus. Seleucus, the other general, he became Seleucus the first. And he was also one of Alexander's 4 inheriting generals, as I indicated. He was given authority to rule in Babylon, which was a good area for all that far eastern part of the empire, in 321. And again, he assumed the title of king of Syria, Babylonia and Media, not a bad little triumvirate there, in 305. And thus Seleucus actually ruled over far more territory than Ptolemy, really, and was given he was king of the largest part, clearly the largest part of the post-Alexander kingdoms. So Seleucus got probably the biggest slice of the cake when it was all said and done. But they were both pretty strong characters. And after some years they will become allies. Now Ptolemy I died in 285. He'd been king for about 20 years. And his son, Ptolemy II, Philadelphus, he ruled in Egypt for a long time, nearly 40 years. Now, meanwhile, Seleucus was murdered in 281. It was a health hazard in those days, and he got murdered, and Antiochus I Sotus ruled until 262. He was followed by Seleucus' grandson, Antiochus II. Now, Ptolemy II and Antiochus were initially bitter enemies. But they finally entered into an alliance in 250 BC, and as Daniel says there, after some years they will become allies. In 250 BC, yep, they became allies, and this is how they did it. Daniel says the daughter of the king of the south will go to the king of the north to make an alliance. Well, it's true. Ptolemy II gave his daughter Berenice in marriage to Antiochus II on condition that Antiochus divorced his own wife, Laodice. Bit rough, sort of, I suppose it could still happen today, but that's what happened. Anyway, a deal's a deal. But Ptolemy, poor old Ptolemy, he died soon after this deal, and Antiochus II then divorced Berenice and took back Laodice instead. Oh dear. And Laodice, she must have been at peace, because she showed her gratitude by murdering Berenice and poisoning Antiochus, her husband, as well, for good measure, making her son Seleucus Callinicus king in his place. So you can get the drift here. There's a marriage. Ptolemy goes. Poor old Ptolemy II, he goes. And then Antiochus says, I didn't like Berenice much anyway. She can go. I'll have my old wife back again. And she gets back at them all, right? And her son gets on the throne. Let me tell you, ancient history only gets worse. When you get to the Romans, it even gets worse than this. But you see how accurate this prophecy is. And the prophecy continues like this right through to the end of the chapter at verse 45. You could say, look, what's all this got to do with us now? It's all ancient history and therefore not of direct relevance today. But I did want to show you that the prophecy is extraordinarily accurate. And you don't have to be a great student of history to understand this. All you've got to do is pick up almost any Bible commentary. If you've got a Bible, even one of those Bibles that's got little notes down the bottom or something, it'll tell you about all this. It'll tell you about it. And this is non-controversial. All Bible students, doesn't matter who they are, they know all this sort of stuff. It's just basic ancient history. And it all happened so accurately. Now, some of it reinforces things we've already learned. For example, there is a long section in the prophecy about the horrendous exploits of Antiochus Epiphanes. A long section indeed. Verse 21, in fact. Interesting to follow this through. We didn't read it when I was reading it through earlier, but he, it says, will be succeeded by a contemptible person who has not been given the honour of royalty. Now, the he referred to in there in verse 21 is actually one of the Seleucid kings, Seleucus IV, son of Antiochus III, Antiochus the Great. And Seleucus IV, he was the eldest son of Antiochus the Great, Antiochus III, and he ruled for about 11 years there, from 187 to 176, and he was eventually poisoned by one of his chief officials, Heliodorus, who wanted the throne for himself. So the chief of staff wanted to take over the throne. That's the end of Seleucus. But Heliodorus figured it was a good time to act, because the only son and heir of Seleucus IV, his master, Demetrius, was being held hostage in Rome. You see, Rome was a developing empire at this stage, and Rome wanted to keep all these Seleucids and the Ptolemies in check, and that Rome was becoming a bit of a superpower, the world's policeman, didn't much like what was going on in the empire of the Seleucids, and so a deal was done whereby Demetrius, the heir of Seleucus IV, Demetrius, you come to Rome and you can have the high life in Rome, but you stay here with us. So your father then is going to do the right thing over there. So Heliodorus thinks, well, the only son and heir is held hostage in Rome. Now's a good time to knock off Seleucus and I can be king. You get the drift? But he didn't figure on the political genius and ambition of the younger brother of Seleucus IV, Antiochus, who with great diplomatic skill and flattery courted various allies, including the Romans, to whom he promised to pay a backlog of tribute money that had been owing, and was one of the reasons that Demetrius was already held hostage in Rome, and he assumed the throne with their approval. Now, Antiochus Epiphanes was really a political genius, a real sleaze bag, I got to say, but he was a cheat and a nasty sort of operator. But he became the infamous Antiochus Epiphanes, or the illustrious one, or Epimanes, as some nicknamed him, meaning madman. And the ancient Greek, he was generally the ancient Greek equivalent of the Romans. He was the Greek equivalent of the Romans' Nero, who was also crazy. And of course we come to him in the 1st century. And Daniel describes him as a vile or contemptible person who had not been given the honour of royalty because he had seized the throne illegally. And the rest of Daniel 11, 21 to 35, the whole of it, is in fact devoted to Antiochus. The whole of it. Not going to look at it tonight. Interesting though to do so. Just one thing I do want to look at. Let's skip some of the earlier historical detail and move to the end of his reign from verses 29 to 35, because I find this quite interesting. Verse 29, at the appointed time, he, Antiochus Epiphanes, will invade the south again. This was the second time he'd tried to take over the kingdom of the Ptolemies. The Ptolemies and the Seleucids are always trying, they at each other's throats. They could never quite get the upper hand over each other, but they're always having a go at each other. And as I say, Israel, the promised land, was sort of in the middle of the buffer zone. So at the appointed time, Antiochus will invade the south again, and he did. He invaded Egypt, but this time the outcome will be different. Ships of the western coastlands will oppose him, and he will lose heart. What do you think that refers to? The western coastlands? Well, in 168 BC, Antiochus Epiphanes invaded Egypt, and Ptolemy VI, he was the ruling Ptolemy at the time, he hired mercenaries from Greece, and they were going to have a big stoush. A major confrontation was looming, but it was averted only by the intervention of a maritime delegation from Rome. Ships of the western coastlands. The Roman Empire, which was beginning to emerge, as I indicated, as the new superpower, the emerging world policeman, the sort of like United States of those couple of hundred years or so. And ships of the western coastlands will oppose him and he'll lose heart. It's exactly what happened, because there's a wonderful story. An ambassador from the Senate in Rome Popilius Learnus met Antiochus near Alexandria, there in Egypt, requesting that he withdraw. And when Antiochus sought time to consider, he wanted time to consider his options, Popilius famously drew a circle around him in the sand and he demanded that he give him an answer there and then. I want your answer now. Otherwise you can consider yourself at war with Rome. Now what is a good self-respecting solution to